Thank you. Welcome everyone to our last colloquium talk of the semester. So we are really happy to welcome our presenter, Dr. Sebnem Atabas. The title of her presentation is A Microgenetic Approach to Novice Teachers Learning Through Teaching. Dr. Sebnem Atabas is a postdoctoral research associate at the University of Southern California. She had her PhD in curriculum and instruction with a major in mathematics education at Florida State University in August 2021. In her dissertation, supervised by Dr. Ian Whitaker, she explored the potential of interactive simulations and accompanying supplementary curriculum materials to be a catalyst for change in mathematics classrooms. Given the demands that ambitious teaching imposes on teachers, she's interested in creating safe and supportive environments. Example, the use of well-designed supplementary curriculum materials for teachers to experiment with ambitious teaching so they can rethink their teaching and assumptions about what it means to teach and learn mathematics, and use these instances as building blocks for teachers' future efforts to improve their instruction. So just to give you a reminder of the structure of the talk. So Dr. Sebnem Atabas will present for the first 25 to 30 minutes. Please feel free to put any questions you have in the chat, and then we will leave the Q&A after her talk. So with that said, it's all yours, Dr. Sebnem Atabas. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the introduction. And I didn't realize that my sentences were pretty long. And I just want to say thank you for this opportunity to share my research in the last 2 years. And it's always great to be back to home. And I'm excited about sharing this work and also share my insights and experiences while working on this microgenetic approach to novice teachers learning through teaching. And hopefully we will have a productive discussion at the end of the presentation. So this work was contextualized in the career project that I was working in, which is titled as Development of Pedagogical Content Knowledge in Mathematics Among Beginning Teachers. So this project was Dr. Yasmin Chopur Gençtürk's career project from 2018 to 2022. And it was exploring the expert novice teacher literature, suggesting that teachers become experts by gaining pedagogical content knowledge throughout their job. But there was little evidence about what and how teachers learn during their early careers. And it was designed as a longitudinal mixed methods study design, and they included more than 200 novice mathematics teachers from 3rd to 7th grade. And these teachers, they had 1 to 3 years of teaching experience, so they were pretty new beginning teachers. And their PCK was examined in the context of fractions and proportional reasoning. And a subsample of 5 teachers for the qualitative phase of the study were chosen. And it was aiming to conduct a microgenetic analysis to investigate mechanisms of their pedagogical content knowledge development. So in this presentation, I will be focusing on this subsample of 5 teachers and how we use microgenetic approach to investigate the mechanisms of PCK development. So teaching is often considered as a generative process. In addition to formal professional learning opportunities, the work of teaching itself creates a rich learning environment in which teachers gain various types of knowledge and skills. So in the literature, we see this as teachers learn through teaching. And teachers also frequently report that their teaching practice becoming a source of their learning. But despite this richness of teaching being a learning resource for teachers, systematic investigations of the extent to which teachers learn from their teaching have been scarce. So given that teaching is a major component of teachers' daily activities, it's a compelling idea to explore the idea of what and how teachers learn through teaching. Although previous studies have indicated that teachers learn through teaching, it's often examined in an artificial environment in which teachers were asked to use unfamiliar tasks or instruction materials, or they were asked to adopt a different pedagogical approach. And there has been limited work conducted to investigate the process of teacher learning. And some of the limitations included the data collection taking weeks or months apart. So to capture the process of learning, high frequency of observations were needed relative to the rate of change that is occurring, which we used microgenetic approach to understand this phenomenon. So, and also teachers may develop a wide range of knowledge and skills through teaching, but it's not clear which factors are related to the development of different forms of knowledge through teaching. And there are two major ideas that shaped the design of this study. First, our conceptualization of like what learning through teaching means. By like learning through teaching as teachers, development of knowledge by engaging in activities that revolve around the task of teaching, which includes planning a lesson, implementing a lesson, and reflecting on the lesson taught, which also shape the data collection process, but without any systematic external intervention. Second, we use microgenetic approach to be able to capture teacher learning. And this is an approach developed by Sigler and colleagues and has been very instrumental in understanding students' learning process. And there are three major principles of microgenetic approach. The first one is focus on novice teachers. Thus, we focus on novices in the context of children learning, but we focus on novice teachers who show a potential for rapid learning through teaching. At the beginning of teaching, teachers often experience a reality shock and engage in a lot of experimentation and trial and error. And there should be a high density of observations relative to the change happening. Thus, we collected data on a daily basis, just before and just after each lesson has been implemented. And the approach also requires an analysis of the data trial by trial to infer the processes leading to change in teachers' knowledge. Thus, we documented knowledge manifested in teachers' lesson plans as well as in teacher reflections during the interviews. So to document the knowledge manifested in teachers' planning and reflections, we developed a conceptual framework for the knowledge needed for teaching math. So this framework builds on the image of instructional triangle with the three components of content, students, and teaching. The first component was general pedagogical knowledge. It's at the intersection of students and teaching, but at a broad level, not specific to any content area. Here you see an example of an excerpt coded for the manifestation of general pedagogical knowledge. While reflecting on her experiences in the lesson, the teacher talks about the importance of grouping students, not letting super chatty ones to work together, but there is no connection to the content. And the other domain was knowledge of students' mathematical thinking, which is at the intersection of students and content. And it includes the knowledge of students' common understanding of specific topics or typical student strategies and content-specific difficulties. And here you see an example of an excerpt coded for the manifestation of knowledge of students' mathematical thinking, as the teacher is talking about a student strategy that she didn't anticipate, but reflecting on this unanticipated strategy between the two strategies that she already anticipated, like making the connection between what she anticipated and what happened in the classroom. And the other domain is knowledge of teaching mathematics, which is at the intersection of the content and teaching. And it includes knowing which examples to begin with for a particular mathematical idea, how to lead a discussion. And here you see an example of an excerpt coded for the manifestation of knowledge of teaching mathematics, as the teacher is talking about specific moves to help students notice the relationship between division and multiplication. In our analysis, we realized that some teachers synthesized all dimensions in the instructional triangle, connecting knowledge of students' understanding of a particular concept to their knowledge of how to teach, that concept, or interpreting student thinking in connection to their content-specific instructional decisions. So we named this knowledge category as synthesized PCK. And here you see an example of a teacher reflecting on the context she used in the exit ticket in the light of students converting the fraction to whole numbers by using minutes instead of an hour. While the teacher was reflecting on this experience, the teacher's goal was for students to find a fraction of a fraction. For future references, the teacher reflected on the importance of using a context of a cookie instead of time, so that students could keep using a fraction. So this was a manifestation of knowledge of content, students, and teaching. And also, teachers' synthesized PCK differs from knowledge of teaching mathematics in that, like, the latter captures only the overlap of teachers' content, knowledge, and teaching. But in synthesized PCK, the teacher connects that knowledge of teaching mathematics to the knowledge of students' mathematical thinking, which was like coming from the classroom experience. So our research questions were like, how did teachers' knowledge change through teaching? Building on the first question, in our second question, we examined the role of teachers' understanding of the content and the tasks that they used in teaching and their teaching styles related to what they learned through teaching. The data, as I mentioned at the beginning, the data is coming from the larger career project that was designed to investigate how teachers' content-specific expertise develops through their own teaching. And teachers, like, across the nation, they were invited to take part in this project in 2018. And all these teachers were novices. So a subset of teachers were recruited for a deeper analysis of learning through teaching. As shown in this table, the final sample included 5 teachers who had maximum 3 years of teaching experience, 2 of whom self-identified as white, 2 as multiracial, and 1 is Black. And the teachers came from 4 different states, except for Hannah, all the teachers had prior experiences in teaching math. So the data collection included 3 cycles, as you see here. And in each cycle, we started with the teacher sharing a 2-day lesson plan, and then a pre-interview was conducted to get additional insights about the teacher's planning. And after the teacher implemented day 1 lesson, just after the lesson, a post-interview was conducted in which the teacher reflected on her experiences in the lesson. And similarly, after day 2 teaching, another post-interview was conducted in which the teacher reflected on her experiences in the second day of the lesson. So to capture the knowledge manifested in the work of teaching, a lesson planning task template was adopted from prior work that was specifically designed for this purpose, to capture what teachers intend to teach, demonstrating how they use their knowledge in teaching-related situations. And to capture the knowledge manifested in the work of teaching, like, we also conducted pre-interviews so that teachers could, like, provide further details about the things that wasn't clear in the planning. For example, like, why did you choose the main task? Why do you think students would struggle with that particular idea, so that they could just elaborate on this? And to capture knowledge manifested in the work of teaching, also we had post-interviews to capture teachers' understanding, like the current state of teachers' knowledge, by asking to elaborate their thinking about the experiences they had in the lesson. Like, did your students use the strategies that you anticipated, or is there anything you will change about the task or anything related to the lesson? So to answer the first research question, we separated the lesson plans and interviews into idea units that demonstrated evidence of teacher knowledge, and an idea unit was conceptualized as a distinct shift in focus or change in topic. So based on, like, spending some time to identify these idea units, we refined the codebook as well. And we double coded the data, and any disagreements were resolved by discussion, but we also had reliability values to compare how well our coding was matching. As a reminder, this was the codebook that we used, which included 4 knowledge domains. And here I will start sharing the results. When we put all the teachers' data together, teachers seem to gain like various types of knowledge from teaching, but it was more about general pedagogical knowledge with some evidence of content-specific knowledge. But when we looked at teacher data at the individual level, like here you'll see more pedagogical knowledge gains. But when we look at the teacher data at the individual level, we saw more clear patterns. In this graph, you see Mike's data. Mike in particular didn't seem to gain much content-specific pedagogical knowledge through teaching. Instead, he gained general pedagogical knowledge from teaching. And in this graph, you see Danielle. And Danielle also didn't seem to gain much content-specific pedagogical knowledge through teaching. And her learning pattern, on the other hand, like compared to Mike, suggested that she mainly gained general pedagogical knowledge, but also had some substantial variation among the cycles. And here you see Trivon's data, and Trivon seemed to gain not only general pedagogical knowledge, but also some content-specific knowledge. But in the cycle 2, we see an inconsistent like pattern compared to cycle 1 and cycle 3. And here you see Linda. In contrast to other teachers, her knowledge of students' mathematical thinking, synthesized pedagogical content knowledge, and general pedagogical content knowledge, they all increased across the teaching episodes. However, she didn't like have a consistent pattern that we could identify. And here you see our last but most interesting teacher, Hannah. Hannah showed learning patterns distinct from those of the other 4 teachers. She consistently gained synthesized PCK and content-specific knowledge as she was reflecting on her experiences, as well as some general pedagogical knowledge. So taken together, like there was substantial variation existing among teachers, but especially for Mike and Hannah. For Mike, we saw like clear patterns of gains in general pedagogical knowledge through teaching, with some limited attention to content-specific knowledge, whereas Hannah, she seemed to develop more content-specific pedagogical knowledge along with some general pedagogical knowledge. In addition to synthesized PCK that I highlighted in Hannah's graph, Hannah also showed evidence of her knowledge of students' mathematical thinking. So to answer the second research question, we coded the data for evidence of 3 potential sources of teacher learning through teaching, especially informed by the contrast between Hannah and Mike. So the 3 potential resources were like content knowledge. The first one was content knowledge, which included instances when teachers showed a robust and limited understanding of content. And here you see an example of a robust understanding of content in which the teacher emphasized the importance of the same reference unit to compare fractions, whereas here you see an example of a limited understanding of content in which the teacher used simplification of a fraction, making the fractions smaller. This is problematic because like equivalent fractions represent the same numerical value. And the second potential source was the cognitive demand of tasks that the teachers were using. And here you see an example of a cognitively high demanding task in which students are asked to work on a story problem for the whole lesson with an explicit prompt to explain their work. Whereas here you see an example of a cognitively low demanding task in which students were asked to recall and memorize some facts about fractions. And third, we look at the potential of teaching styles. And here you see an example of a student-centered approach in which the teacher positions herself as reading the problem, answering only clarifying questions, and encouraging students to independently work on the problem, and also positioning students to listen and comment to each other's strategies. Whereas here you see an example of an evidence of teacher-centered approach in which the teacher reviews the procedure and positions students to take notes and work on the assessment based on the demonstrated strategies. To investigate the role of these three potential sources, we calculated the mean changes in the frequency of each knowledge domain for those who were categorized in the two contrasting evidence of content knowledge, tasks, and teaching styles. For instance, to investigate the role of the tasks as a source of change, we calculated the mean changes in the frequency of each knowledge domain for those who use tasks with low or high cognitive demand in each trial. And these trials are the reflection trials. So when we visually represent this analysis answering the second research question, we saw that when teachers had a more robust understanding of the content as manifested in their planning and pre-reflections, they were more likely to gain content-specific knowledge, as shown in this graph. And similarly, when teachers used more cognitively challenging tasks, they were more likely to gain content-specific knowledge. And finally, when teachers adopted more student-centered pedagogical approach, they were more likely to gain content-specific knowledge. So what we can conclude from this work, aligned with previous research on teacher learning through teaching, this study shows some evidence of teacher gain of knowledge from their teaching, but with major variance among teachers. And when we look at the overall picture, teachers who had a robust understanding of the content, who used cognitively high demanding tasks, and who adopted a student-centered approach, they developed more content-specific knowledge, whereas teachers who had a partial understanding of the subject matter, who used cognitively low demanding tasks, and who adopted a teacher-centered approach, they were developing more general pedagogical knowledge. So the contributions that this work makes in the field, we closely examined the learning from teaching on a daily basis, which helped us to attribute the learning to teaching, not to other sources. And we used a microgenetic approach, which afforded us to explore the process of teacher learning. And we also showed some evidence of the importance of high quality tasks and student-centered pedagogy being beneficial not only for students, but also for teacher learning. And there is also the importance of having strong understanding of the concepts being taught in schools for teachers' professional growth. So I think this study, at least for me, raised some questions more than answering questions related to teacher learning through teaching, which I find very exciting. And in the future work, we may expand this study with more novice teachers. And also it raised the questions about how to empower teachers to learn through teaching, because we saw a clear contrast between Mike and Hannah, what were some differences in terms of their professional preparation. And how do we capture teacher learning through teaching was a big question for me, adopting a microgenetic approach, but also using some alternative means of teacher learning, such as pedagogical reasoning or problems of practices or framing. So I will briefly talk about how this work informs my future research. So in my dissertation, as we discussed briefly at the beginning of the presentation, I explored the potential of interactive simulations and supplementary curricular materials to be a catalyst for change in math classroom. And I focused on teachers' instruction practices and teacher reflection. So my interest was about how to create safe environments in which teachers can experiment with ambitious teaching so that they can rethink their instruction practices and the assumptions and expectations they have related to what it means to teach and learn mathematics. And I'm aiming to use these instances as building blocks for teachers' future efforts to improve their instruction. So how does this work inform my future research for in-service teachers? I think I see learning through teaching as a larger like umbrella term, and prior work on learning through teaching like generally created artificial learning environments for teachers to use unfamiliar tasks or instruction materials or adopt a different pedagogical approach. Like when I position teachers' use of supplementary curricular materials, like these materials are often designed for student learning, which is compelling for teachers because they often use these online materials with their own willing, especially with a higher trend during the pandemic. And these like resources, if they are well designed and also like enriched with technological tools, they can create an authentic learning environment that is safe and supportive for teachers, because this is already part of teachers' routine to use some additional external materials. And also, it raised some questions about beginning teachers or pre-service teachers, like what competencies help beginning teachers to learn through teaching. And Hibbert and colleagues in 2007, they identified 4 skills to prepare teachers to learn through teaching. And they were aiming the skills of like setting learning goals for students and developing some cause and effect relationships between teaching and learning in the light of these goals, and specifying hypotheses for why the lesson did or didn't work well, and using this hypothesis to revise the lesson so that teachers will learn through their teaching experience. And here I also want to share a productive conceptual struggle that I went through in our effort to document teacher learning. In our microgenetic approach to teacher learning through teaching, we focused on teacher knowledge. And conceptualizing and documenting teacher knowledge in teacher planning and reflections pushed my thinking about like, what do we mean by knowledge? So I reviewed the literature and I came up with 2 different perspectives on knowledge. The first one is cognitive perspective on knowledge, which has this implicit assumption of like knowledge is abstracted outside of the context and it can be assessed and explicated. Whereas in situated cognition perspective on knowledge, the assumption is that knowledge is situated in contextual environments where it is used, and researching knowledge involves understanding the activity in which knowledge is applied. So how knowledge is expressed is in especially meaningful environments. So through this work, I expanded my understanding of teacher knowledge through the literature, and I believe I made some progress in clarifying my confusion and struggle in documenting it. PCK is both an external and internal construct, and it's constituted by what a teacher knows, what a teacher does, and the reasons for teachers' actions. So rather than an either-or case, I concluded that I will just bring the features of this like spectrum on the each end, and rather than being like an either-or case, I concluded that being aware of the assumptions we make and considering the limitations and affordances of each approach is important. And when we adopt each perspective or use a blended approach like Kirsting and colleagues who made some like innovative ways to capture teacher knowledge in use. And in each case, we are making some contributions to understand the complex construct of teacher knowledge. So this is my presentation. I hope it wasn't too fast and you could follow the details, and I'm just looking forward to hearing your comments and questions.
Thank you, Sebnem, very much. At this point, we, like Sebnem said, will open the floor for questions. Feel free to unmute and ask, or if you want to drop it in the chat, we can ask from there as well.
I have a question.
Sure.
Hi, this is Sherry. I was wondering, this is really, really interesting work. Thank you. I'm hoping that some of our students get to see it. How do you account for the effects of asking questions repeatedly? So, you know, you're asserting that the teachers are learning from their teaching, but you check in with them over and over. So is it that they're learning from their teaching and having a chance to speak with
Yeah.
someone? Because most teachers don't get a chance to speak with an adult to make sense of what's happening. So I just was
Exactly.
wondering about your
Yes.
thoughts on that.
Yes, I completely agree with this comment, because one of the teachers, she was explicitly making this point clear. Like, she was saying, like, since you are asking this question in the, I think, cycle 2, she was like thinking through the questions on herself. So I think reflection is a big part of like teacher learning, but like, do teachers have a chance to reflect on their experiences in the classroom is a question mark. Like, there are very rich experiences that teachers, if they are aware and reflect on these instances, it can be a very productive like thing for the teacher, but often they don't have that like time and effort to reflect on their experiences. But once we start asking them like, how did the lesson go, or like what kind of like surprises or unanticipated strategies did you see, then it becomes even richer. But the resource of the teacher learning is the classroom and the interactions between students and the teacher.
I'm going to challenge you a bit on that, because it's not just interaction between the teacher and the students, it's the teacher and you. It's having a chance to think through in response to questions that you ask. That's
yes.
So just being sure to bound your results that way. It speaks to the need for space and opportunities to reflect. Thank you very much. It was really great.
Thank you. Also, like, you made me think about one of the other struggles that I experienced, because like there is some authenticity that we try to maintain, like not having too many external impacts on the teachers' experiences. But if we start collecting data and if we start teachers asking questions, then it becomes an external factor involved in the teaching. So, but compared to like other ways to explore teacher learning through teaching, we try to minimize our impact, because we didn't ask teachers to use a particular lesson plan. It was like their business as usual materials. And like, but still, if we want to be involved in the, like in their environment, then we are becoming an external factor. But maybe there are other ways to minimize our impact, like teachers working together with another teacher, or like teacher groups or collaborations in which they can ask these questions to each other, so that it will be a more authentic and organic experience for them.
It certainly speaks to the need for time to think and make sense of one's experiences.
Yes. Thank you.
Sebnem, in the chat, Anne asked if using a coaching model, like a practice-based coaching model, for example, might be beneficial to allow for that emphasis on reflective practice that you've been talking about.
Yes, exactly. I cannot see chat. Sorry, I'm not so. Oh, I forgot the acknowledgement slide. Sorry. This work on this presentation was supported by Dr. Yasmin Chokur Gençtürk's career grant. And I just want to acknowledge and say thank you one more time. And I still cannot see the chat. Could you please repeat the question?
Yeah, sure. No problem. There's a couple of folks who are wondering about teacher mentorships or using a coaching model that could maybe help to emphasize or allow for emphasis on the reflective practice component that you were talking about.
Yeah, exactly. I think I'm more interested in like how we can develop some professional development experiences for teachers that can be sustainable in their work environment and without much external involvement. So hopefully it will go in this direction, like teachers working together with the guidance of a coach, but maybe they will develop some kind of routines and skills so that they will keep learning with or without the involvement of the external like characters. Yes.
Can you say more about how you approached knowledge or what the nature of the evidence is for teacher learning on this micro level?
So based on the examples I provided, we tried to pedagogical reasoning in terms of the 3 dimensions might be a property of teacher knowledge from my perspective. Sorry, I will just go back to the diagram, including all the dimensions. So the evidence was for example, for knowledge of students' mathematical thinking, one particular evidence was the teacher was reflecting on an unanticipated student work and trying to make sense of this unanticipated strategy in relation to the ones that she was expecting. So this is one example of okay, I learned something new about student thinking and I'm trying to make sense of it. So this was one example of evidence of knowledge. But I was feeling very uncomfortable about using knowledge. I could use pedagogical reasoning, combining the 2 dimensions. So there are different ways to approach, I believe. But the career project was aiming to capture PCK specifically. So that's why it was a middle ground. But this is the evidence that we were seeing. Or the teacher was saying, the example that I gave, I think it was a very clear example. The teacher used time as the context of the problem, but she was hoping students to use a fraction, find a fraction of a fraction. But instead of doing this, students, they changed hour to minutes, and they had whole numbers, and it wasn't serving the purpose or goal of the lesson. And the teacher reflected on this experience in connection to her instructional decisions. And she said that I saw students using this strategy. So it's evidence of knowledge of student thinking, and also making the connection to next time I should use a different context so that students will be using or finding a fraction of a fraction instead of changing it from hour to minutes. So these were the evidences of teacher knowledge being manifested in teachers' reflections.
Okay, so is it just they're focusing on this aspect versus a different aspect, or you had to identify some specific evidence of, oh, that was unexpected. Oh, now I know something I didn't know before. Is that it?
Yes. Yes. Some kind of surprise or something new. Yes.
On the slides where you have these graphs and you're saying so-and-so gained knowledge in this area.
Yes, for example, for Mike, at the beginning of this is trial 1, in which he was talking about his planning and the pre-interview data. And here we see more emphasis, or at the end of the lesson, while reflecting on his experiences, he was raising some other instances where he made sense of the unexpected thing happening in terms of general pedagogical knowledge. So it was more general teacher moves in relation to student behaviors, but not necessarily including the content as a component.
Yeah, so this is telling us what they were focusing on. The frequency of focusing on this aspect versus that aspect.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, to understand what do we mean by knowledge, I read a lot about there is some literature about knowledge in use and knowledge in action, knowledge on action. So there are different frameworks that has been used in the literature. So if I will design something in the future, I will definitely consider all this prior work on capturing teacher knowledge. But it was my first attempt in the context of a career project that data collection, it was already done and the design was done in a particular way. But I think it was a very enriching and powerful experience for me to tackle with this like frameworks and try to understand like what do we mean by knowledge and how do we capture it. Thank you for the question.
Hello, Sebnem. This is Lama. So good to see you. Thank you for making time to share your research with us. Really, really interesting work. I wanted to ask you if there was anything in the findings that you found puzzling or surprising, or something that you felt like, oh, I did not anticipate that like, and you puzzled over it in ways that did not match your expectations, or
yes,
yeah.
I think this like research experience raised more questions for me, but I think one interesting point was the clear pattern in Mike and Hannah. Like they were super consistent about like what kind of knowledge or like instances they were focusing or attending to. In contrast, like Linda, Kevin, and Danielle, they were not that consistent in terms of like what they are attending to. So I was particularly interested in like what happened in cycle 2. Like I was trying to understand, like, is there something different between cycle 1 and cycle 2, which leads to this picture? Or the same as Trevon in cycle 2, there's something different going on, especially in cycle 3, because like we see an increase or like gain in knowledge of students' mathematical thinking, and general pedagogical knowledge being in the secondary kind of focus. So I think these instances made me to think about like what is happening even in the more micro level for teachers. And one idea was like when the teacher was using a high cognitively demanding task or like cognitively demanding task, like there were more opportunities for students to express their thinking. So if the teacher attends to these instances, it could turn to be a learning experience or like at least some kind of opportunities to learn about how students make sense of these ideas. So yeah, it was like one exciting moment because at the beginning of my doctoral program, I was interested in like, okay, tasks are important for student learning. Okay, but what about teachers? Like I was always interested in like, what about opportunities that these tasks or interactions create for teacher learning? Thank you.
Thank you. That makes sense. That's great. Thanks.
Sebnem, Daniel is asking if teachers are teaching different concepts in cycle 2.
They like all the lesson plans, they were focusing on fractions or proportional reasoning, depending on the grade level that they were teaching to teachers. And there were some slight differences, but here is the like picture, the overall picture. Like Linda, she was teaching in 5th grade, and Hannah, she was teaching in 5th grade. So their lesson plans included proportional like reasoning as well. So they were not perfectly matching, but they were all focusing on fractions and proportional reasoning, depending on the grade level. I hope that answers the question, but if there are any follow-up questions.
He said thanks, so thank you.
And it's very complex, like to capture teacher learning from teaching. Like there are so many different things going on. So I think it's not easy, but also acknowledging the challenge and embracing might be an option, but being aware of the limitations as well. I think it was my main takeaway from this experience. We still have 15 minutes. Was it too fast? Like, I told you, when I get nervous, I speak too fast.
No worries, you did great. We're just allowing some wait time here.
Okay, sounds great.
I will say too, Shabnam, for context, this is our last day of teaching. So, and it's a Friday, so people are pushing through the end of the semester, and so there's that too. As
Yeah,
we're
it's
engaging
understandable.
with new ideas.
Yeah. Thank you so much for like creating this opportunity for me to share my experiences and challenges that I went through, because like making sense of things, it's so exciting for me, but also at some point you feel frustrated about, oh my God, like it doesn't make sense. But it was a big relief for me to see the distinction between like knowledge in cognition and knowledge in stated cognition. So this like contrast was so helpful for me, and not feeling alone in terms of my ideas and struggles. And I think like literature became a friend that I can just go back and read about other people's sense making about the same like ideas and get some help to clarify my confusion.
That seems like good advice to grad students, and I think we have some grad students here attending. Thank you for sharing that as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I miss being back to FSU. Like I'm just using all the opportunities to be back. Yeah, and it's nice to be here.
Are you planning to publish this work somewhere, Shabnam, or
Yes, it's
present it?
submitted to Journal of Teacher Education, but we haven't heard back yet.
Okay,
So,
great.
yeah, it's under review.
Good luck. That's excellent.
Thank you.
Just looking to see if there's any hands raised. I don't see. We do have about roughly 10 minutes. If there are other questions for Dr. Atabas.
I don't know about the norms, like if we will wait for 10 minutes, like sure, I can.
Since we have you and we don't want to squander resources because this is FSU, for goodness sakes, what would you do with this information in a mathematics teacher preparation program? So what sort of changes would you, or activities would you suggest?
Yes, exactly. And again, I wasn't alone thinking about this. Like, I think Hibert's work on how to empower and prepare pre-service teachers in the program so that they will keep learning from their own teaching experiences. I think maybe making all these like ideas explicit in the teacher education program, like framing teaching as a resource for teachers to learn. Like your classroom is a space not only for children to learn, but also as a teacher, you will learn a lot, because like shifting your attention to student thinking creates a rich environment for you to like be exposed to authentic or like unanticipated strategies. So maybe making this like ideas explicit in the teacher education program and providing some kind of reflection questions, like these skills that Hibbert and colleagues, they recommended. And yeah, I think this was my takeaway. Like there is a lot going on at the beginning years of teaching when pre-service teachers, they start teaching, and being aware of it can be challenging, but it's also a resource for you to learn from your experiences.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's great to talk about all the things that I was excited as well, and my concerns and my struggles. I think, yeah, sharing it helps me a lot.
We're getting lots of thank yous and lovely presentation type responses here in the chat. So
Thank you.
I hope in the future we can continue to reach out. So faculty that are here, if you have students that have moved on into other positions and would be, willing to share names and where they are with me, that would be lovely as we plan for upcoming seminars for next year. Thank you. Yeah, so Ryan asked about the recording link. It should be available, right, Amel, on all of our what am I trying to say, social media outlets and whatnot, right?
Correct, yes.
And I think if you signed up through the Eventbrite link, I feel like you get it automatically, or is that an incorrect statement?
I don't think that's correct. I think
Okay.
actually it's just shared on our YouTube channel, SDE.
Okay, so Ryan, yeah, you can check out our YouTube channel.
Yeah, I visited all the recorded ones.
Okay, good. Okay. All right, 8 minutes, going once, going twice. Any final questions or comments for Sebnem?
Okay, now I see the chat. Okay.
Okay, good.
Just a little late.
Okay, well, if anyone has any questions, do you have a link with your email address up there, Sebnem, that you can put up just one more time while I wrap up here? That would be fantastic. We'll be sending out information for our first colloquium of 2023, which is crazy to think about. It'll be Dr. Jenny Root from our special education program. So be on the lookout for that information. And I hope everyone has a nice end of the semester wrap up. Great holidays. Thank you all for coming today. And thank you, Dr. Atabas, for sharing your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you all.
Right, thank you.